All right, my name is Alyssa Ralston. It is October 13th, 2023 at 1:30 p.m. We're here in the Nicholson Library at Linfield University, and we're speaking today with Frank Molek, class of
1968.
1968. So Frank, tell us, why Linfield?
I came from a farm family up in the Portland area, Reedville, Aloha, Hillsboro, and had investigated colleges on the East Coast and in the Midwest. And during that time, I also had some friends who were graduated from Hillsboro High School. A person by the name of Ad Rutschman was my football and baseball coach, and of course, everyone knows that history and where that went. But when my mother had become ill and moving away to college in Annapolis or Washington, D.C. was not going to be a possibility, I looked more closely in Oregon State versus Linfield. I loved participating in athletics. I was strong in math and physics. The Linfield Research Institute gave me a fellowship. The college gave me a fellowship. Not a scholarship, because we didn't give scholarships back then. I think they don't still. But in any event, I came down for a visit and was sold, and have been a champion of Linfield's cause ever since.
What about your visit sealed the deal for you? Was it just the financial support? Was there something about the campus that you really liked?
Well, the financial support didn't hurt. I had raised cattle, sold cattle, built up a little nest egg over 18 years or so, and had money for college on my own. But the financial assistance certainly didn't help. But the beauty of the campus gives a great first impression. The camaraderie and family feel of what I sensed on that weekend. My roommate in Anderson Hall as a freshman, roommates would have been two Hillsboro graduates, 2 years and 3 years older than I did. They turned a rookie every which way but loose. They had a lot of fun with a raw freshman rookie. But all of those things, plus getting to know Coach Roy Helser, the baseball coach at that time, and he's a legend in his own right in Portland baseball and Oregon sports history, etc. So all of those things combined.
So you mentioned the baseball coach, and I know that you were on the 1966 baseball team. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Well, it was kind of miraculous, actually. We had a lot of players. I was there were only two sophomores on the team, and I played as a freshman on the varsity, and we got to the playoffs, the district and regional playoffs, and then were beaten in the district. The second year, we had several really good athletes, not all of whom were baseball players, but Coach Helser saw some things in them and made them into good baseball players in spring training. And midway through the season, we were a 500 team and really had to scramble to even win the championship of our conference. We went on an 8 or 9 game winning streak, got to the district, won the championship of the conference, had a playoff, won that, made it to the district finals, won that in a sweep, got to the regional finals against teams from California, Idaho, Washington, and then Oregon. We represented Oregon, won that in a sweep, and then for the right to get to the World Series in St. Joseph, Missouri. And won that in 4 straight. So we never lost a game from the midseason on. I can't tell you what was the magic pill or the special sauce, but it all just came together. And I point out a lot of my teammates had special seasons the second half and onward. Johnny Lee is a sports legend here at Linfield from Connecticut. That year, as a junior, he was the only, in NAIA history, Division III history, was the only athlete who played in 3 national tournaments in 3 different sports in the same year. Linfield football played for the national championship down in Augusta, Georgia. Johnny was on that team. Ted Wilson took a team back to the national finals, the series in Kansas City, Missouri. And he was on that team, and then we went to the World Series in baseball, and he was a shortstop for us. So he and I became close as a second base shortstop combination. So I think all of a sudden the seniors and the juniors and we sophomores and the one freshman we had sort of bonded somehow. And it's like how the World Series is going this year of the playoffs. There are no first seed teams left. All the wild card teams are the ones beating everybody else. So therefore, we're kind of a rags to riches story.
You've talked about the role of Roy Helzer and Ad Rutschman. Are there any other mentors that you had on campus that you can think of, or any particularly influential?
Well, those two were primary. Ted Wilson was a special person. I didn't play basketball for him, but I knew him when he was a coach of a high school in Portland area, Beaverton High School, and I went to Hillsborough High School. They were our arch rivals, and we never were able to measure up to Beaverton teams. Then he came to Linfield while I was here, and 20 years, 2 months, and 2 days after I introduced my sister to Ted Wilson on the football field after a game where everybody comes together, parents, students, athletes, whatever, one of those 20-minute, 30-minute post a game, I introduced her to him, and 20 years later they were married. So Ted Wilson is part of our family, and I go back with him. Yes, the answer to your question is people like Elmer Frick, Elmer Millian, Paul Gebauer. These names are ancient in terms of those alumni who might view this. Harry Dillon, I could go on and on. They're all, Harry Dillon and Paul Gebauer are instrumental in me thinking post-graduation and steered me toward something called the Fulbright Hayes program. And I was lucky enough to get one of those, primarily through the guidance and help of Paul Gebauer and Harry Dillon in that selection process. Now it's not easier, it's never easier, but there are many more students who are able to take advantage of the Fulbright program. Then it was a fledgling program, and it was a wonderful experience, and it was a metamorphosis moment for me. I moved then from the right brain, the math physics side of the house, to the international affairs, liberal arts side of the house, and was very enamored with international affairs, international educational affairs, and that caused me to think about going to study. I ultimately went to Georgetown's School of Foreign Service, met and married my first wife, who's also been my only wife of 52 years, and the rest has been a wonderful run. So
let's go back and talk about the Fulbright. Tell me about applying for it and your experience with the program and how it helped to get you to Georgetown.
I am not of German extract. I'm a first-generation college student from an Eastern European family, the old Yugoslavia, Slovenian to be precise. And I'm the first generation. And Eastern Europe was also always a fascination of mine. I was a sponge soaking up any and all history I could, even though I was a science major. So when I met Paul Gebauer as my German teacher, he was also my history of religion teacher. The more we talked outside of class, the more I became interested in international affairs, international religious affairs, educational affairs, etc. And a gentleman a colleague of mine, a fellow student, a year before me, Paul had assisted in the Fulbright program. His name is Doug Lamoureux. I'm not sure if Doug still lives, but he and I became good friends. And the long and the short of it, he was sort of the forerunner, and as I understand it, he was the very first Linfield Fulbright scholar. I was the second, and followed in Doug's footsteps with Paul Gebauer's help. And I'm convinced that the reason I had a plan, a desire of what to study, a few other things, but I'm convinced that what provided me the yes that I wanted was Paul Gebauer, had a contact at a German university, the University of Münster in Westfalen, northwestern, in the old British sector in West Germany, at a university, and he was in mathematics and mathematics education, and adopted me as a godson, so to speak. He was my Doktorvater, my PhD counselor, so to speak. That's a loose translation. And he wrote a letter on my behalf to the Fulbright Commission, and I'm convinced that not only because I had the application process and had all kinds of letters of reference, and so does everybody else, but the fact that I had someone from where I wanted to go who had a door open for me and had an endorsement for me. That was the reason I'm convinced I made the first cut and was awarded that fellowship. I went to Germany. It was an comparative educational study of math and physics students at the secondary school level, seniors in high school, so to speak, and comparing each of the 11 provinces, states in West Germany to what a senior in high school would study. Comparing that to I got to 8 different provinces in the old East Germany, and so the comparison was West versus East, and then in insgesamt, which is in collaboration, what they would learn in mathematics and physics in the United States as a senior in high school. And so that was my thesis, and it was fun. It got me a chance to travel inside doors and get in places that back then in 1968, 69, and 70, most people were not able to. And I was able to milk the 1 year to 2 years. That's unheard of, and realized a degree from the University of Münster because of that, and a Fulbright extension, and so forth and so on. So when I came back, I decided, left brain is where I want to be, as opposed to, so I put my slide rule back. No, nobody knows what a slide rule is anymore, and my calculator and all that nonsense, and pursued life in international education affairs. So that was transformative. I want to say it was a transformative experience.
Mm-hmm. What did your research bear out then for comparing the physics and math?
Well, we think we're pretty hot stuff in this country. School in Europe, and particularly East Europe, the Soviet system and the East German system, much more rigorous back then. I think it is still now, but now kids went to school 6 and sometimes 7 days a week. Sundays was even a part day. And so it was much more rigorous and complete, and they were doing things that you and I would consider at the freshman and sophomore college level in mathematics and physics, and that was a major takeaway. East German, a little bit more advanced than in West German high schools or gymnasium. They were flying past what constitutes the advanced levels, the A levels, if you pass, you can go to selective universities of your choice, etc. And when I compared all of that to the United States, I think back in our day, I can't tell you what it's like for preparing high school students for college these days. I can only guess, and I've heard parents today talking about it. We were well prepared for college, but I don't think we could quite hold the same candle as our counterparts in West and East Germany. So, and maybe I'm going to get email feedback from that.
So tell us about your time at Georgetown. What did you think of DC?
Loved it. It was a transformative experience. I was lucky enough to be at the right place at the right time. It was July of 1970, and I was going on an exploratory visit, visiting schools in Boston, at Harvard and the Kennedy School, and SAIS in Johns Hopkins, and so forth. And I went to George Washington. I'd been to Columbia University. I did a trip moving a family to the East Coast, and they paid me so much a day to help drive one of their vans back and pulling a power boat and all that. They were moving from Portland to Bangor, Maine, and I was the guy to help them family, and we drove across the Trans-Canada Highway. And when I got there, they paid me and gave me a first-class, equivalent of a first-class ticket back from Bangor to Portland, which I pocketed and made my way down the coast to Boston, New York, and on to DC. My last visit was Georgetown. I went to George Washington, an American University School of International Service, and then I went to Georgetown and had a wonderful visit with the then director of the Masters of Science in Foreign Service, who we talked baseball, we talked farm kid from Oregon, because he was a farm kid, I think, from Kansas, et cetera, et cetera. And at the end I said, well, my father and mother used to say, never overstay your welcome. Always leave a little earlier than you think you should, because then they might think to invite you back someday. So I was about to wrap up, and he said, no. I said, now one last question. What's the deadline for applying for a year from now? And thinking he would say November, December, something like for the following September. And he said, why are you, he said that, answered me, said, why are you asking me. And I said, well, I know this is July. I know the admissions calendar because I worked with Tom Michael for a year here at Linfield. I know a little bit about admissions and calendars and financial aid, et cetera. No, this is on the 1st of July. The 4th was on a Saturday, so this is on maybe a Tuesday. He said, if you can get me back this application and this and this and this, and get me have them send a photocopy and send somehow a transcript and your curriculum vitae, I didn't know what the hell that was, your resume, by Friday before the holiday, I'd like to. So I didn't wait till Friday. Thursday, 2 days later, I hand carried everything in and gave it to the secretary, and she said, just a minute, I'll see if he thinks everything is here. She went in, 5 minutes later he came out and said, everything's here perfectly. I said, what's going on? And he said, well, we have a cancellation and I'll be in touch. Monday, after the holiday, I was singing on the banks of the Potomac River with, 3 million of my most recently made friends singing God Bless America with 1970. It would have been Richard Nixon, I think, as president. I flew out Monday morning. By the time I got back to Portland, I had a phone call from Dr. Heck saying, I'm pleased to inform you, blah, 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 that I was accepted. And I said, well, doctor, that's wonderful. Is it for the following year? No, it's for September 5th or 6th or 7th. I said, there's a little question about, I have some money put away. I have no college debt, happily, but I need, financial. I said, that's all right, I've worked things out. You're going to get a fellowship. You have a student loan I've arranged, a fellowship from Capitol Hill, and thirdly, I saw on your resume you have an admissions experience with Linfield. I said, yes. He said, well, I'm on the search committee at the admissions office at Georgetown, undergraduate. They sometimes employ graduate students as interviewers of students who want to apply. And I've spoken to my friend, Charlie Deacon, the dean of admissions, and he'd like to hire you for 25 hours a week. So I had a fellowship, a loan, work-study loan, and a job at the admissions office, and I put the phone down, and my jaw was at my belt buckle, but I had 6 weeks to put my affairs together, load up my Volkswagen Beetle, and drive across the country to make it by Labor Day to get ready for graduate. And then the school, I was a fish out of water because I'm a math physics guy, and everybody else in the program were English majors, political science, economics majors, multiples of all of the above. They know world history in their memory, et cetera. And I'm in kindergarten, so to speak. And so I realized I was the Pete Rose of academics. Nobody was ever going to outwork me. I didn't have much ability, but nobody's going to outwork me. And I realized I had to start from scratch. And a friend of mine who later we became roommates, had come from Trinity College up in Connecticut he was an economics, English, literature, history buff, and he's a walking encyclopedia of history. And we became roommates, and he became a mentor, an inside mentor. And I swear to this day, we've maintained friendships for 55 years. He was the best man at our wedding, et cetera. And I said, Bobby, if you hadn't been in my life, I swear I never would have made it through this program. So he helped me, and he said, no, I owe you my life. He had been in Vietnam. He had just come back like 2 months, 6 weeks before he enrolled at Georgetown. And you were the only one, when I came back to this country, who listened to me. Because that was a time, as many people know, that veterans coming back from the Vietnam War were not exactly regarded very highly, certainly not decorated, and certainly not, there wasn't thank you for your service at all. And we'd stay up until 2 and 3 in the morning talking about experiences he would have. That's after I got my homework for the day done, and so forth and so on. But there were a lot of things that were transformative for me. Making it through something that I never thought I should even be in, let alone made it through. Help from somebody else, help from a community. There were only 32 of us in that program. So there was a close-knit family. We worked hard together, we socialized together, we played hard, worked hard, et cetera. But when I left, and now at Georgetown, much like Linfield, my wife and I are making a legacy gift. And for me, it's a fellowship. I'm endowing a fellowship in honor of Dr. Heck, who, he had not been at the desk when I came on July the 1st and glued everything together, God knows where I'd be today. So that's my long, short story.
He made it very easy for you to say yes.
Well, it was complicated, and I thought, damn. And the short answer is yes, once I realized I could put all the things together in 6 weeks. So anyway.
So you mentioned that you spent time on Capitol Hill, and that was with Edith Green, correct?
Yes. She was a House of Representatives from the state of Oregon in the Congress of the United States. She headed the Special Subcommittee on Higher Education, which was a part of the Educational and Labor full committee in the House of Representatives. And her committee made it a specialty to hire nobodies like me. And my first job was on Capitol Hill working as a research assistant in her office. She later became a member of the trustees at Linfield. She was a highly, in the history of the state of Oregon, a real advocate for education. I think I have this right. She was either an elementary or secondary school teacher, maybe both, in her former life, and real advocate for education. But she was a across-the-board strong representative, and she served multiple terms until she retired in, gosh, I don't know what it was, in the 70s sometime. So.
Can you tell us what it was like working for her and then working on the Hill in general?
Well, it was magical. My first apartment was sharing with 2 other gentlemen who worked on Capitol Hill and lived on a place, it was an intersection of 3rd Street Southeast, which is, you could hit a sand wedge a short distance behind the Supreme Court building on Capitol Hill, so I could walk to work. They worked on Capitol Hill, and the bottom line is I lived near home. It's transformative now, because I remember my first night or two in at the house at night, I would hear what I thought were firecrackers and celebrations, and it was not a holiday, but they told me the next morning those weren't firecrackers. The so-called Washington, D.C. demilitarized zone was about 3 blocks further south, and it was like Berlin after the war. And I didn't know any of that. I'm a naive farm kid from Oregon, but I've since learned a lot about Washington, D.C., and it's been much more gentrified all around Washington. It's really a beautiful, beautiful city, and I'm a major proponent of anything to do with Washington, D.C. I could never afford to live there now, but I loved it. And it was, I got involved in some things in higher education and secondary education through Representative Green, and I loved it when Dr. Walker, I don't know what year, I remember what year it was, but she had retired from Congress, and he asked her to join the Board of Trustees, and she served, I want to say 7 or 8 years. I could be wrong on that, but she was a major force for the college. Then the college, now the university. And
so I think from there you moved away from DC. Tell us about that transition out.
I worked after the degree. My wife and I, Juliana, she and I graduated actually on the same day. She from the undergraduate school at Georgetown's School of Foreign Service, and I at the master's level. And we were married a month later in Washington, D.C., and spent the next 5 years of our married life, first 5 years of our married life in Washington, D.C., and I was on the staff in the admissions office at Georgetown. And primarily, I had three responsibilities. One, I found out when you know just a whisker more than anybody else on a certain topic, you're the expert, okay? So they found out about my international experience, so I became all that sort of thing, and I'd been on a Fulbright, and so I was anointed. I reviewed all the applications from international students who studied in those countries but wanted to come to Georgetown, American students who would study abroad and wanted to come to Georgetown, or international students who were studying in the United States, finished the program in the United States and wanted to come to Georgetown. So there was a large pool of those students to review. So second, that was one responsibility. Second was, during my career there, something called the Alumni Admissions Program was created. And the task was not for recruitment, but for selection. When you apply, you would do all the paperwork, and then if you wanted and are able, they would like to have you come to the campus for a personal interview with one of the admissions officers. And they wanted, he had counselor references, teacher references, and all of that, but they also wanted an alumnus or an alumna from your area to be matched together and interview you in Des Moines or Portland, Oregon, or McMinnville or Long Island or what have you. So my job was to coordinate that, and when I took the job over, we had 8 committees in 3 states interviewing. When I left Georgetown in 1976, we had all 52 states, we had 11 foreign countries, and we had over 500 interviewers interviewing students. So it was a selection tool, not a recruit. Now there's obviously a stewardship and recruitment element to it, but it was a tool for a selection. I was called one day by Dr. Walker, and I said, I know your name. He was telling me about he had been on the job a month, 6 weeks, and said, I've heard a little bit about you. I know you're in admissions. I'd like to have you come out and think about talking about a job in development and public relations for us. And I said, there was a third, I come back to the third responsibility. I said, Dr. Walker, I worked in admissions with Tom Michael. I've been in admissions for 5 years now, but I'm in admissions. I'm not in development and alumni affairs. I mean, there's some relationships here and public relations. You're not talking about the admissions job. Tom Michael has been in the job that time at 30 years or so, and I think when he retired, he'd been in the job 40 years or something. You're not talking about Tom's job. And he said, no, I'm talking about, I said, my experience in that world is a little bit limited. He said, I'll never forget it. He said, Frank, I've never been a college president either. He came from Russell Sage College in upstate New York. He was VP for Academic Affairs and Provost, never been a college president. He said, well, Frank, I've never been a college president either. Let's learn together. And I said, man, I've never heard that before. And he said, second of all, I have a mentor. His name is Lyle Nelson. Does that name mean anything to you? And I said, no, it didn't. He said, Lyle grew up in Yamhill, Oregon on a farm. And when he was growing up, had there not been a college 5 miles from his family farm, his mother and dad would never have had a college education if Linfield hadn't been right there. He said, I went on in life. He graduated from the University of Oregon. After a year, they hired him to found the first foundation at the University of Oregon. Foundations, private philanthropy at colleges, private colleges, had already been, it wasn't well developed, but it had already been going on. State universities had done a little bit, but not much. Only when they formed a foundation which acts like a private institution at a public institution did they start raising money, because the money would stay. If you raised money at a state institution, the legislature would take a third to half of it because of the funding they give, et cetera, et cetera. So the University of Oregon founded its first University of Oregon Foundation, which allowed them to raise money as a private institution under the umbrella. And their one mission in life was to do good for the University of Oregon, okay? Linfield didn't need one, we were private, okay? So Lyle was the founding president. He stayed there for 5 or 6 years, had a gangbusters career. The University of Michigan stole him to run the first $100 million campaign in state-supported state school history. He went there as their vice president and president of their foundation, had a rip-roaring career. Then Stanford stole him to come to Stanford, same position, to run the University Relations Office, which was development, alumni affairs, and public relations and marketing, same as they have at Linfield here. It's called advancement, et cetera. And they wanted him to run their first first institution in the history of higher education to raise a $1 billion campaign. He went there and tore the roof off. And in his retirement, his job was chairman of the communications department at Stanford. And it was in that role, with that kind of pedigree, he came to Linfield in Dr. Walker's first or second month, introduced himself and said, in honor of my father and mother, I want to give you 3 days a month to do whatever. 1 day to be assigned to you, because I've counseled presidents and deans before in my life. 1 day to work with you on any topic. 1 day, I hear you're starting to form a development, public relations, alumni affairs office. 1 day to work with your new person, whoever you hire. And the third day would be TBD. Place me where you want me, with the board of trustees, whatever. So Dr. Walker explained that all to me, and I thought, holy cow, an inside mentor who has more wisdom in his little finger than I ever will in my whole life. So I came home and asked my wife, Juliana, I said, how do you feel about Oregon? And she said, well, it's green. They have water, rivers, and there's an ocean. She said, they have good seafood. Why are you asking me? So I told her, and the rest is history. We relocated about 4 months later, and we spent almost 6 great years here working with Dr. Walker, and created an operation that now is the advancement office, and it was a lot of fun. Had a lot of success and fun, and working with Lyle and Dr. Walker was a pure joy. And I'm hoping he hears this, because I know Lyle is since deceased, but Charlie Walker, I think, still lives here, and maybe even has a place at the coast and so forth and so on. But I hope he hears that, because bless you, Dr. Walker.
We'll send it over to him.
Yeah.
So after you left Linfield, where did you go?
You don't have long enough to hear my story. I'll give you the short version.
We do have long enough. We have until 4 o'clock.
Okay. We all turned into pumpkins, do we? We all turned into pumpkins at 4 o'clock.
Purple pumpkins.
Yeah, purple pumpkins. I was recruited to go to the University of Chicago Law School from here. And University of Chicago is a preeminent private university. People think of the University of Chicago as a state school. It's not. It's the hot stuff people of Chicago consider the law school, depends on what poll you look at, but among the top 5 in the country. And it's usually Harvard, Yale, Chicago, Columbia, and so forth. Maybe sometimes if you a certain faculty member in a certain discipline says, oh no, Harvard, Chicago, Yale, it doesn't matter. But it was a wonderful, they hired me to be associate dean and direct a capital campaign that they wanted. It was the first ever capital campaign they were going to run to build an addition to the new law school and do some endowment and faculty endowment work and student fellowship endowment work, a comprehensive campaign, which I did for little over 5 years. So from there, I was asked to candidate at, I've never been a vice president, and I've learned some things in the process, but to consider a vice presidency in San Antonio, Texas, at St. Mary's University. It's a small university, but a comprehensive one. It has a law school, school of engineering, a liberal arts college, and I'm missing 2 or 3 other colleges. Not a large university, had about 7,000, 8,000, now about 10 or 11, and was there university relations, same portfolio, and was there for just about 5 years. And then St. Louis University calling, more major university in the shadows of Georgetown, et cetera, Jesuit University. They had an opening as a vice president, and much larger staff, et cetera, and much larger aspirations. So I went there for 3.5 years, and then after that, my wife, these are all situations where I was asked, and my wife always, who built careers, she's more employable than I ever will, because she has always built careers for herself wherever I or we have gone. This time, turnabout's fair play. She was recruited. She had started working for a healthcare company that's a subsidiary of United Health Group, which has its headquarters in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And she several times would be called to the mother house, so to speak, meetings and this and that, and was asked one time from St. Louis if she'd ever considered Minnesota. So she comes home one day and asks me. And I'd only known Minnesota because I'd go various ways. When I'd come from Portland or McMinnville to Washington, D.C., I never wanted to go the same route twice. So going which way, I'd always go different routes. And she said, how do you feel about Minnesota? And I said, well, it's green. They have water. They say they have 10,000 lakes. There's no ocean, but why are you asking? And she said, well, I've gotten a call, et cetera, et cetera. So that brought us. I'm the trailing spouse in Minnesota this time, and she got the job, and I helped put the house together for sale and got the moving van going, and was able to land a couple of opportunities with interviews and so forth, and a couple of opportunities, and landed with what's called the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum. And I thought to myself, well, I've been with colleges and university my whole life. When I went, I said, this is a beautiful place. I'm a farm kid from Oregon, has a beautiful setting, but they had a library, they have a campus, they do education of children and secondary school children, they have a graduate program for university students, but they don't grant degrees. They're part of the horticultural science program at the College of Agriculture at the University of Minnesota. So they're not a college, but it's close. So they're a campus, they have a library, they have a beautiful setting, and I'm going to call them my college. So this was in the same genre of what I worked at, and they wanted me and I wanted them, and we lived, my wife's office was only 5 miles away from where we settled down. My office was only 3 or 4 miles away, so it was a yes and a yes. And so I just retired from the University of Minnesota, the Landscape Arboretum, after 25 years, just a couple of years, 3 years ago, so in any event. They're a sister institution to the Rose Garden, to the Japanese Garden, the Chinese Garden here in Portland. Those three, there's the Oregon Gardens in state, and I think it still exists. Those are all sister institutions of the Minnesota Landscape Inn, along with some other national, international, well-known gardens. So I did the same work there as well.
So we're talking about roughly 45 years of advancement and development. How do you keep it fresh for 45 years?
You love the work. I love the work. And I can't do this. I found out long ago, I can't do this just anywhere. I didn't go to Minnesota as an institution. I didn't grow up next door to the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum, but I've got to have a kinship to the setting, what's around me, and particularly the people at those institutions. And there have been ebbs and flows about the people at various institutions. But when I was at St. Mary's, certainly at Linfield, the University of Chicago Law School, and the University of Chicago, and certainly at the Arboretum, these are people who are serving this institution, not getting rich, but because they loved what was going on, and they loved the work they were doing. And that spills over. So I wanted, if I could do a little bit of my work to help them do a better job, have more tools to do their work, great. If I could do my work to put a little more in the endowment coffers so that the dean or director or executive vice president or the president of the Arboretum could pay them a little more, then it made me feel better too. So keeping it fresh was, in that sense, easy. But I also realized you're only as good as those around you. So the job was, do your homework, know what you need to fill. Do your homework on people who you think are candidates. Do a great job in hiring those people, and then when you hire them, help them become heroes, champions. Because if you make them look great, what are they going to help you look like? And they're going to do great jobs for their institution. So my mantra has always been, do your homework. Because if you do, you deserve what you get. If you don't, you deserve what you get. So people around me, I've been very lucky, and they have great energy, and I have a little bit of energy, and there's been some synergism here. And then the institution, what it represents, has been important to me.
So what does that look like if you're supporting someone and helping them be the best they can be? As a manager, how do you foster that?
Two things, I think, and there may be a lot of answers to this by others, and maybe after 20 minutes I'd think of something else, but two things. One, I try to find out what that person's passions are. What do you want to be when you grow up? What is your passion? What's your sweet spot? And then, therefore, once I know that, or maybe they're reluctant to tell me, you look this way and you look that way, and you can determine what their own sweet spot is, even if they don't know what it is or what they tell you what it is. And then to, in a horticultural sense, seed it, put fertilizer on it, water it, and watch the flower bloom. Second of all, look for that in the hiring process. And you can, because if you can support people in their passions, and secondly, if you can determine what is someone's fears. I don't want to do that because I might fail, or I'm going to fail. To help them push those boundaries through your support, sort of like helping your grandchild ride a bicycle. You know, you're there pushing the bicycle, and all of a sudden they don't realize your hands are not on the bicycle anymore, and there they are. So in any event, those two things, I think. It was wonderful to see. I used to be angry and frustrated when someone was stolen from my staff, so to speak. And then all of a sudden it dawned on me, well, if they're stolen to take on something bigger, better, faster, taller, you know, leaping tall buildings somewhere else, I thought to myself, well, wait a minute. What does that say about what they did for us here? What does that say about the recruitment or the recruitment process of what we went through? Or what does that say about me? What does that say about me? Well, then I turned from I'm disappointed to go with God's blessing, you know. Make yourself a champion to make us all look good for having had you. So in any event, that's what my philosophy has been, and I've been through the hiring process quite a few times.
So in 45 years of advancement and development, what do you think is your biggest professional accomplishment?
Surviving.
Yeah.
Well, this is going to sound awfully self-serving, but there are a couple of things, I think. One, to say that I was in the business 45 years. And that I loved every minute of it. There were times when, in certain cities, I would say were less favorable to me and to our family than others. There were times, others, where we loved the institution, loved the setting, loved the location, etc. My wife is Hispanic on her mother's side. She is Irish on her father's side. That's a hell of a combination. Me, Eastern European, bullheaded. You know, it's a miracle we survived 2 years, never mind 52 years together. But when we moved to San Antonio, you can imagine the Caucasians in San Antonio were in a minority. It's like a whole nother country. Tex-Mex food is on every dinner table. It's wonderful. She loved it. She thought we never would leave, but when we did, and anyway, it's a beautiful home we had and all the amenities. So the settings were wonderful, but I'd say two things to answer your question. One, to say I was in the business 45 years and loved in about 3 of those cases that we left the place in a very different state than when we went. Second of all, third of all, I guess, I was lucky enough. I guess when you live long enough and you're decrepit enough and you look pathetic enough, like I am right now, they throw things at you. And for some of us, looking pathetic comes hard. You have to work at it. For others of us, looking pathetic comes naturally. The year I retired, the Arboretum, where I was, nominated me for the fundraiser of the year in the profession in the state of Minnesota in the upper Midwest. And I was selected that year and presented that award before 500 people in the profession in Minneapolis, downtown Minneapolis, at a gala ceremony. It was quite emotional and they did a video and all that nonsense, but it was quite and board members of ours, my staff, and I turned to them and said, you know, you've heard my speech many times, you're only as good as those around you, so thank you guys and I applaud you, etc. And the benefactors of ours and the hiring CEO was sitting there. He had since retired. He was sitting there, and I said, we had a great run together. We had a lot of fun, didn't we, Peter? And so forth and so on. But that was one of my favorite shining moments. But anyway, I would have had many others that I would have cited, but that was one of the special ones.
It's nice to be recognized.
Yeah.
So what is it like to come back to Linfield after all this time for homecoming? Is it nostalgic, bittersweet, nice to connect with old friends? How are you feeling today being here for homecoming?
Well, I come back fairly often, not every year, not a couple of times a year. I had a relative, my sister, kind of like a second mother to me, 15 years older than I, who married Ted Wilson, as a matter of fact. So she had retired and was in a adult care center here. So I'd come back every 3-4 months during the 5 years she was. So I'd come back 2 or 3 times a year. I always try to come back at least once every couple years. And since she passed, I would come back every 18 months, 24 months. I came back a year ago at homecoming because there was, I can't remember the actual glue that brought me back, but there was something going on. And my grade school class at Reedville Grade School still exists, would always have a gathering, 27 kids in the class, and there are about 18 still living, which is a miracle by itself. I was there yesterday for a lunch, today for a lunch with them, breakfast, and the high school is a very tight high school at Hillsborough. That class of 64, same thing. And the class of 68 here at Linfield, the same. So I found myself coming to 3 reunions a year ago on the same weekend. This time I came back and had the dean of the college speak to us at the Heritage Society, Legacy Society lunch, and a couple of her colleagues on her program, and I go, wow, sports management, sports science, healthcare administration. I mean, these are all programs that didn't even exist when I was here. And I thought to myself, and I asked the dean during question and answer, I said, why the heck was it that I was born 55 years too early? I would love to have gone through sports management here. It didn't even exist. You were lucky enough to have an accounting degree from Dr. Elkington and some other kind of management degree, but that was about it. Now there's a School of Business, et cetera, et cetera. So when I come back, I'm going, holy smoke. Not only are the facilities amazing, the programming is amazing on steroids. The athletic complex doesn't hold, I mean, our facilities don't hold a candle to what exists now. They do extremely well by all the heritage of the athletic heritage here through the Hall of Fame at the gymnasium and all that sort of thing. So it's always wonderful to come back and reminisce and tell lies to each other about how great we were and how much success we had and all that sort of thing. I had lunch today with the widow of my major professor who passed away maybe in the early 2000s, and I hadn't seen her in 40 years or so. And we were sitting next to each other, and her daughter was with her. As she looked similar to 45 years ago, but it was a wonderful reunion. Great memories. I wouldn't change a thing, except I wish I were born 55 years later.
Well, you've outlined all of your accomplishments as we've been chatting, and one of the themes that has come up a couple of times, you referred to yourself as a farm boy from Oregon. Do you really feel like you're still the farm boy from Oregon?
I still have hayseed in my hair.
You do?
Yeah.
All right. That's about all the questions I had for you. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you would like to, or anything you'd like to mention, or anybody you'd like to address?
This is going to self-serving, and she did not put me up on this. Neither did Debbie Harmon, nor did Charlie Walker, or Miles Davis put me up to this. And it is an extension of my adage about you're only as good as those around you. Linfield is only as good as those who preceded those here now. And all of us need support for various things: moral, emotional, physical, and financial. And so I realized that long ago, that when in my business, I can never ask someone to do something for which I am involved unless and until I've made my gift first, okay? Because the expression, please do what I say, is very different from please join me as my wife and I have done. So we have done some things for Linfield. We're not wealthy, but we've done some things through the Heritage Society and annual support and the athletic program, et cetera, et cetera. And I am mentoring a recently graduated senior. 2 things. She has just been awarded a Fulbright to go to Brazil, And second of all, she wants to go to the School of Foreign Service graduate program, and guess where? Georgetown University. So we're double Hoyas, my wife and I, and we're cheerleading her cause and trying to mentor her through the admissions selection and financial aid process. Students here, faculty here, the university can always use different kinds of support. So won't you join me as we have done?
Thank you so very much for your time, Frank. I know this is kind of you're running on fumes in terms of sleep, so we appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Alyssa.
All right, have a good